It was a cold winter evening when everything changed. My name is Amelia, and this is the story of how I lost everything and found myself in the process. Another long day at the office had drained me, the harsh fluorescent lights making everything feel endless. I trudged up the steps to our two-story house in the suburbs of Boston, my breath visible in the chilly air. Something was different when I opened the door. Richard, my husband, who was always the calm, composed type, was pacing in our living room. His normally neat appearance was disheveled, his hair wild, his eyes wide, filled with an unusual mix of excitement and something I couldn't quite place. I set my bag on the counter, my mind racing as I asked, "Richard, what's going on?" With wide eyes, he turned to me, his voice trembling with emotion. "I won $50 million. Can you believe it?" For a moment, I was frozen in disbelief. This couldn't be real, I thought. Just yesterday, we were struggling with debt, trying to keep our dreams alive in the midst of financial chaos. And now, suddenly, Richard had won a fortune that could change everything. I rushed to him, excitement flooding my veins. "Oh my God, that's incredible. When did this happen?" Richard's face gleamed as he pulled me close. "I bought the ticket on my way home from work yesterday. I almost forgot about it, but this morning I checked the numbers and bam. We're rich, Amelia. We're set for life." In that moment, everything seemed perfect. No more worrying about bills or the leaky roof we couldn't afford to fix. We could start the family we had always dreamed of. But then, as the evening progressed, something changed in Richard. His excitement began to fade into something colder, more distant. He was no longer talking about our future together, but his own desires. "I think I'll buy that sports car I've always wanted," he mused, almost to himself. "Maybe a bigger house, something with a view of the ocean." I tried to join in, suggesting a trip to Europe, something we'd always dreamed about. But his reaction was sharp, his tone dismissive. "This is my win. I bought the ticket. I get to decide how to spend the money." His words stung. In all our years together, Richard had never spoken to me like this. We were a team, always sharing our joys and struggles equally. But now, with a stroke of luck, I felt like an outsider in my own marriage. As the night wore on, Richard's behavior grew more erratic. He bragged on the phone to his friends, making grandiose promises. His voice had changed, less about us and more about him. I had become invisible, a ghost in my own home. Later, I went to bed alone, unsure of what was happening to the man I thought I knew and what our future would look like now. The next morning, I hoped things would be different. Maybe Richard had just been overwhelmed by the shock of winning, and once the excitement wore off, he'd remember who we were and what we meant to each other. But as I made my way downstairs, I could feel that something was terribly wrong. Richard was standing in the living room, a stack of papers in his hand. Behind him stood his mother, Evelyn, her lips curled into a smug smile. The air in the room grew cold as Richard turned to face me, his expression businesslike. "Amelia, we need to talk," he said, his voice as cold as ice. My stomach dropped. I walked into the room, already sensing what was coming. Richard handed me the papers, without another word. As I looked down at them, my heart sank. They were divorce papers. I barely registered the words on the page. My mind was spinning. This couldn't be real. Just yesterday, we were celebrating our future together. But now, in the wake of a windfall, Richard was casting me aside like I meant nothing. "You're not getting a dime from me," Richard spat, his voice venomous. "Sign these papers and get out of my house. I don't owe you anything anymore." I stared at him, my hands trembling as I held the divorce papers. The pain of betrayal washed over me, but I refused to let it show. Instead, I forced out a whisper. "How can you do this? We've been through so much together. How can you throw it all away?" Evelyn stood behind him, clapping her hands in delight. "That's right, Richard. Expel this witch from your life. The money belongs to you now," she chimed in, her voice sickeningly sweet. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Richard had always said we were a team, but now he was making decisions for both of us, as though I didn't exist. As though our life, our marriage, meant nothing. I set the papers down on the coffee table. "You can't be serious," I whispered. But Richard was already looking away, his eyes cold. "Sign the papers, Amelia. It's over." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I swallowed them back. I didn't have time for this. With my world crumbling around me, I had no choice but to gather whatever belongings I could carry and leave. Evelyn's taunting voice followed me through the house, listing all the things Richard would buy with his newfound wealth. An hour later, I stood on the front porch with a duffel bag in my hand, watching my life slip away. The winter wind bit at my cheeks, but I barely felt it. The betrayal was colder than the night itself. As I turned to leave, I caught one last glimpse of Richard through the window. He was already on his phone, making plans for a life that no longer included me. And just like that, I walked away, no longer a wife, no longer a part of the world I thought I knew. But this was only the beginning of the journey I would have to face. I didn't know where to go or what to do next. The numbness of the betrayal had settled deep in my chest, and all I could do was walk into the night, away from the life I had built with Richard. The cold air seemed to seep into my bones, but it was nothing compared to the chill inside my heart. I couldn't look back, not at that house, not at the life I thought we had. I walked for hours, unsure of where I was going. Finally, I found myself standing in front of the Sleepy Pine Motel. The neon sign flickered weakly in the distance, a dying beacon for the lost, the forgotten. It seemed fitting. With nothing but the clothes on my back and a duffel bag, I trudged through the nearly empty parking lot and into the lobby. The night clerk barely looked up as I asked for a room. He slid a key across the counter without a word. Room 17 was exactly what I expected. Small, run-down, with faded wallpaper and a bed that sagged in the middle. But at that moment, it was all I needed: a roof over my head, some space to breathe, and a place to think. I sank onto the bed, my mind reeling. Everything had fallen apart so quickly. Just yesterday, Richard and I were planning our future. Now, I was alone in a dingy motel room with nothing but a bag of hastily packed clothes. The pain of betrayal felt as if it would suffocate me, but I refused to let it. The hum of the ancient heater was the only sound in the room, and it did little to mask the silence in my head. Richard's face kept flashing before me. The loving husband I thought I knew, now replaced by a stranger consumed by greed. His words from last night echoed in my ears. "You're not getting a dime from me." How could money change someone so completely, so quickly? I hugged my knees to my chest, trying to make sense of everything. How had it all gone so wrong? How had the man I married, the man I had supported through everything, turned into someone who would discard me the moment he thought he had money? His voice still lingered in my mind, accusing me of stealing his win, but the truth was that the ticket, the $50 million, had been registered in my name. I laughed bitterly to myself. It was almost poetic. He had discarded me without a second thought, thinking he was entitled to the money, but it wasn't his at all. It was mine. And as I lay there in that motel bed, the weight of the truth settled over me like a heavy cloak. Richard may have thought he had won, but I was about to find a way to take control of my life again. Little did I know, that was just the beginning. The journey ahead would force me to face the darkest parts of my soul and give me the strength to reclaim everything I had lost. The next few days were a blur of uncertainty, each one seeming to drag on longer than the last. I stayed holed up in the motel, avoiding the world outside. Every morning I woke up with a tight knot in my stomach, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me. Richard's betrayal was raw, a fresh wound that seemed to bleed no matter how hard I tried to forget it. But I couldn't forget. I had to face it. The cold, dreary mornings were matched only by the growing sense of urgency. I needed to take control, to reclaim my life and my sense of self. The $50 million was mine, and I knew what I had to do next. After a few days, I reached out to Sarah, the lawyer who had been recommended to me by a friend. She was calm, collected, and most importantly, experienced. I needed someone who could help me navigate the legal complexities of claiming the money without it spiraling into another battlefield with Richard. As I sat across from her in her office, explaining the details of what had happened, Sarah listened intently. "We'll file the necessary paperwork to claim the money," she said after a few moments of thought. "The ticket's in your name, Amelia, so you're legally entitled to it. But be prepared. Richard may not let this go without a fight." Her words echoed in my mind as I left her office, feeling both hopeful and uncertain. Richard wouldn't just walk away from this. His greed was too strong, and the money too tempting. But I wasn't backing down. I'd lost everything once, and now I was determined to take back what was rightfully mine. The next few weeks passed quickly as I navigated the process of claiming the money. Every step was calculated, methodical. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about making sure that Richard didn't get away with what he had done to me. I wasn't just fighting for $50 million, I was fighting for the truth. I was fighting for my dignity. But despite all the legal paperwork, part of me couldn't stop thinking about the day I had left him. The feeling of walking away from our home was one I could never forget. It had been the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it had also been the moment I had taken control of my own life. I was no longer a passive character in someone else's story. I was the author of my own narrative. I started spending more time outside the confines of the motel. I found a small, cozy apartment near the city center. Nothing luxurious, but it was mine, and that was what mattered. It felt like a new beginning, like the first step in the journey I had unknowingly begun when I walked away from Richard's lies. I knew I still had a long road ahead of me, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the money could help me build a new future, but it wasn't the money that would define me. It was my ability to stand on my own, to rebuild everything that had been shattered. The weeks following my decision to fight for the money were a whirlwind of legal paperwork, meetings with Sarah, and endless phone calls. I had never felt more like a soldier on a mission, preparing for battle. Every step was planned meticulously, and with Sarah by my side, I felt more in control than I had in years. As the days passed, I found myself slowly regaining a sense of purpose. The pain of the betrayal, the ache in my chest from losing Richard, was still there. But I no longer felt like I was drowning in it. I was learning how to breathe again, how to take each step with intention. My new apartment, small and unassuming, became my sanctuary. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I could come home to a space that was completely under my control, without the oppressive shadow of Richard or his manipulative mother hanging over me. There was a certain peace in it, a sense of quiet that allowed me to think clearly for the first time in a long while. I decided to start over, not just in terms of where I lived, but in terms of what I wanted for my future. One thing was certain: I would never again let someone dictate my worth. I would never again let anyone make me feel like I was secondary to their desires. With the legal battle brewing over the lottery money, I turned my attention to something that had always been my secret passion: art. I had abandoned it years ago, pushing my dreams aside to support Richard's career. But now, with time and financial freedom on my side, I decided to pick up the paintbrush again. I enrolled in art classes at a small local studio. The first day was terrifying. I felt like an imposter, like I didn't belong there. But as I sat down at the easel and dipped my brush into the vibrant colors, something inside me shifted. I was creating again. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't painting for anyone else. I was painting for myself. The more I painted, the more I realized that this was the missing piece of my life. This was the part of me I had buried for so long, the part that had been stifled under the weight of obligations and the expectations of others. But now it was mine to nurture, to grow. Over the next few weeks, I spent my days painting, immersing myself in the creative process. I poured my emotions into the canvas: anger, sadness, joy, hope, and everything in between. Each brushstroke felt like a step forward in my healing process. One day, Lisa, a fellow student in my art class, stopped by my easel. She had been watching me work quietly for days, but today she spoke up. "Amelia, your work is amazing," she said, her eyes wide with admiration. "You really should show it to someone. You've got something special." Her words struck a chord with me. I had never thought of showing my work to anyone outside the classroom, but maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to take the next step, to share what I had been creating with the world. Encouraged by Lisa, I decided to submit my paintings to a local gallery. To my surprise, they accepted my work for their next exhibition. It felt surreal. A small part of me wanted to back out, to hide my vulnerability. But another part, the stronger part, knew that this was my moment to step forward. The night of the exhibition, I stood in front of my paintings, surrounded by strangers who were admiring my work. My heart pounded in my chest, but there was also a deep sense of pride swelling within me. This was my art. This was my voice. As I stood there, a woman approached me, a well-dressed, confident-looking woman with sharp eyes. "These are extraordinary," she said, pointing to my triptych that depicted my journey from betrayal to freedom. "I'd love to talk to you about possibly showing your work at a larger gallery. I think people would respond to it." My mind went blank for a moment. I had never imagined that my work would lead to something like this. But here it was, an opportunity, a new door opening. I exchanged contact information with Eleanor, the gallery owner, and left the exhibition that night feeling a mix of emotions. I had no idea where this would lead, but for the first time in a long while, I felt excited about the future. As the days passed, I continued to paint, to pour myself into my art, and to rebuild my life. The money from the lottery was still a looming presence in my life, but I was no longer consumed by it. The wealth gave me options, but it didn't define me. My true power lay in what I created, in the way I could transform pain into beauty. I was no longer the woman who had been discarded, the one who had been made to feel small. I was Amelia, an artist, a survivor, and a woman reclaiming her life. And the journey had only just begun. The days that followed my gallery opening were a blur of excitement and self-discovery. I found myself on a path I never could have imagined just months earlier, one where my talent and passion were no longer stifled by the weight of Richard's betrayal or his mother's manipulations. I had reclaimed my life, and I was determined to embrace everything that came with it. One evening, after a particularly rewarding art class, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Sarah, my lawyer, with an update on the lottery money situation. My stomach dropped. I knew this moment would come eventually, but hearing it felt like a punch to the gut nonetheless. "Amelia, I've received word that Richard's legal team is filing a motion to contest the lottery winnings," she told me, her voice calm but firm. "We expected this. They believe that since Richard bought the ticket, the money rightfully belongs to him." I felt my world tilt. Even after everything that had happened, even after he had discarded me so callously, Richard was still trying to claim what wasn't his. I let out a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. "I'll be ready," I said, my voice resolute. "I've fought for everything I have, and I'm not backing down now. Let's make sure we handle this the right way." As the weeks wore on, I found myself preparing for the legal battle that was now inevitable. The paperwork piled up, the meetings became more frequent, and my resolve only grew stronger. Richard and Evelyn had underestimated me. I wasn't the naive woman who had once put her dreams on hold for their sake. I was Amelia Rossi, and I was ready to fight. Meanwhile, my art continued to flourish. Eleanor, the gallery owner, kept her promise and featured my work in her larger gallery. People were responding to my paintings in ways I had never imagined. There were interviews, commissions, and even art fairs. I had finally found my place in the world, and I was thriving. But despite my successes, the legal battle hung over me like a cloud. The day of the hearing arrived sooner than I expected. The courtroom was cold, sterile, and intimidating. I could feel the tension in the air as I sat there with Sarah, my heart pounding in my chest. On the opposite side, Richard and his lawyer sat, looking smug and confident, as if they truly believed they had a right to the money. The proceedings were long and grueling, with each side presenting their arguments. Richard's lawyer claimed that since Richard had purchased the ticket, the winnings were rightfully his. My lawyer, however, stood firm, presenting the fact that the ticket was registered under my name and that legally, I was the rightful winner. When it was my turn to speak, I felt the weight of the room on my shoulders. I stood up, my legs shaking slightly, but I held my head high. "I've been through a lot in the past few months," I began, my voice steady despite the nerves swirling inside me. "I've lost my marriage, my trust in the man I loved, but I've also found something invaluable, myself. This money, this win, it's not just about the money. It's about the strength I've gained and the life I'm building for myself. As I spoke, I could feel Richard's eyes on me, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't flinch. I wasn't the woman he had discarded. I was someone new, someone who had built a life from the ashes of her past. The hearing lasted for hours, but in the end, the judge ruled in my favor. Richard's claims were dismissed, and the lottery winnings were legally mine. I walked out of the courthouse with my head held high, feeling a surge of relief wash over me. It wasn't just about the money, it was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. As I left the courthouse, I felt a sense of closure, but also a deep understanding that this was just one chapter in my journey. I wasn't done yet. The road ahead was still filled with challenges, but I knew that I could face them. I had already come so far. The following days were filled with a mixture of emotions. I reflected on everything that had led me to this point, the pain and the healing, the betrayal and the redemption. I thought about Richard's letter, his apology, and the sense of finality it brought. I had no intention of reconnecting with him, but part of me couldn't help but feel a strange relief that he was at least seeking help. And then, the most unexpected thing happened. A few weeks after the legal battle was behind me, I received an invitation from the women's shelter I had supported with my donation. They were holding an event to honor those who had contributed, and they wanted me to attend as a special guest. When I arrived at the event, I was met with a warm reception. The women there had come from all walks of life, but their stories of resilience and strength resonated with me. As I spoke with them, I realized that my journey, my pain, had meaning. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about showing others that they too could rise from the ashes of their past. By the end of the night, I was exhausted but filled with a sense of purpose I hadn't known in years. I had used my own experiences to help others, to show them that they could rebuild their lives no matter what had been taken from them. As the night drew to a close, I stood in front of the women, my heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," I said, my voice breaking slightly with emotion. "Thank you for reminding me that we are all stronger than we think. And thank you for letting me be a part of your journey. We may have been broken in the past, but we are not broken now." As I walked out into the cool night air, I realized that this was the moment I had been waiting for. This was my rebirth. I had learned that true strength doesn't come from wealth or success. It comes from within. And no matter what life threw at me, I would always rise. After winning the lottery, Amelia faced betrayal and heartbreak as her husband, Richard, turned cold and greedy. But through the emotional roller coaster, she found strength and independence. The legal battle over the money proved her resilience as she reclaimed what was rightfully hers. Instead of letting the wealth consume her, Amelia chose to use her newfound resources to help others, setting up a fund for women in need and pursuing her passion for art. As she rebuilt her life, Amelia discovered that true power lies in overcoming the past and trusting herself.